Good evening, fellow wanderer of the night. I'm so glad you found your way here, to this lantern-lit path through time. The world outside may still be busy, streets humming faintly, clocks ticking steadily. But here, in this small corner we share, the pace slows. The air feels softer, like the hush that falls over a quiet courtyard just before dawn. Tonight, we'll walk together through shadows and candlelight, letting the noise fade until only the gentle pulse of history remains. Perhaps you are wrapped in a quilt by a flickering fire, the kind that paints amber shapes upon the walls and whispers in the language of embers. Maybe you're tucked into your favorite chair, a warm cup resting by your side, its steam curling lazily into the dim-lit air. Or perhaps you're lying in bed, listening in the stillness, your thoughts drifting like leaves on a calm stream. Wherever you are, I hope you feel the comfort of this moment, the quiet reassurance that you are not alone in your love for the past. I wonder, where in the world are you listening from? Is the moon high above your rooftops, or is the sun still painting the horizon in soft golds and purples? When you share your corner of the map, you become part of a constellation of voices and hearts, pinpoints of light in a vast, global tapestry. Each listener is a thread in this weaving, and together, we form something enduring and beautiful, bound by a shared curiosity for the stories of those who walked before us. If you find yourself returning to these moments, if the sound of these stories settles something deep within you, I invite you to join our circle of dreamers. Here, history isn't a list of dates and battles. It is a living, breathing world of faces, voices, and small details that make the past feel near enough to touch. By staying with us, you become part of a community that keeps these stories alive, carrying them gently from one mind to the next, as though passing a flame from candle to candle. So, let's turn our steps toward the heart of our journey. Imagine a horizon brushed in the pale silver of moonlight, where the silhouettes of night's banners flutter against the night sky. Hear the low hum of a marketplace winding down, the creak of wooden gates, and the distant echo of church bells marking the hour. Rising above the cobblestone streets stand great stone fortresses, their towers crowned with banners, their walls breathing centuries of untold secrets. The air smells faintly of wood smoke, fresh bread, and damp earth. Here, time slows, and the world feels both grand and intimate, ready to reveal the lives of those who once ruled these lands. Tonight, we will not rush through battles or drown in dusty scrolls. Instead, we'll linger in candlelit halls, walk through royal gardens at dusk, and listen for the soft footsteps of monarchs whose shadows still rest on these ancient stones. So take a slow breath, let your thoughts settle, and when you are ready, step softly into the past. For our journey into the world of medieval royalty is about to begin. Picture, if you will, a realm where shadowed forests stretch beyond the horizon, their whispering leaves concealing ancient secrets, while far above, cathedral spires pierce the sky like prayers carved in stone. This is medieval Europe, a vast tapestry woven from centuries of triumphs and trials, stretching from the fading embers of the Roman Empire to the first golden rays of the Renaissance. It was an age where the sacred and the superstitious often walked hand in hand, where pilgrims' chants might echo through serene valleys, even as rumors of witchcraft spread through market squares. Crusaders carried banners across continents, merchants brought silks and spices from distant lands, and the tolling of church bells marked both the rhythm of life and the shadow of eternity. In this intricate world stood the monarchs, figures both flesh and myth, whose very presence seemed to bridge earth and heaven. They were shepherds anointed by divine will, tasked with guiding their flocks through seasons of plenty and famine alike. Their authority was draped in ceremony, every gesture heavy with meaning. Imagine the circlet upon their brow, its sacred gems catching the glow of candlelight, each stone a silent testament to lineage, conquest, and faith. The scepter they held was more than a symbol of power. It was a promise, sworn not just to the people they ruled, but to the God who, they believed, had placed them there. Now close your eyes and step into their shoes. See yourself seated upon a carved oak throne, the hall around you rich with the scent of burning resin and beeswax candles. Tapestries line the walls, depicting hunts, battles, and coronations. Each thread a story of those who came before you. Courtiers wait in silence, their faces unreadable, as the soft murmur of a fountain in the corner mingles with the distant toll of the chapel bell. Your word can grant land, raise armies, or change the course of a family's fate. Yet that same word, once spoken, cannot be called back. You are robed in velvet and fur, a figure of majesty, but beneath the finery, you feel the weight of the crown, heavier than its gold could ever account for. For being a monarch is not simply to rule, it is to carry the burden of oaths sworn before witnesses in heaven alike, to uphold traditions carved by the hands of ancestors, to forge legacies that will outlast your own name. There is glory in it, yes, banquets lit by 100 candelabras, the thunder of applause after a just decree, but also solitude, the kind that echoes even in the grandest of halls. Every choice you make ripples through your realm, touching lives you may never see. And so, as the day's affairs fade into evening, the flicker of torchlight begins to soften the angles of the stone walls. You rise from your throne, footsteps echoing in the vastness, and wander through halls aglow with amber light. The air grows warmer, more intimate, as the grand corridors give way to the quiet sanctuary of the royal bedchamber. Here, the outside world will soon fade away, and the night will hold you in its timeless embrace. Shall we step inside? The hour is late, and the past is waiting. The muffled echoes of the castle's first stirring fade as the royal couple is left in the hush of their private chamber. Beyond the heavy curtains, the world still holds its breath, but here, dawn makes its quiet entrance. Through a narrow arched window, a pale ribbon of sunlight slips into the room, gilding the folds of the velvet-draped bed and glancing across polished oak panels. The faint perfume of last night's beeswax candles lingers in the cool air, mingling with the softer scent of lavender from the embroidered pillows. The hearth, still warm from the night's fire, breathes a gentle glow over the chamber, an ember's comfort that will soon give way to the day's demands. On the bed, the king stirs first, shoulders shifting beneath a coverlet stitched with golden thread. The crown may rest elsewhere for now, but its weight never truly leaves his brow. Beside him, the queen opens her eyes slowly, her dark hair spilling over the pillow in an unguarded moment of repose, a picture only the earliest hour allows. A quiet knock at the great oak door is followed by its careful opening. The chamberlain of the privy steps inside, bowing low before speaking in a tone as soft as the morning light. "Your Grace, the day awaits." The king inclines his head, a signal more than a reply. Behind the chamberlain, 2 attendants enter, bearing garments folded with deliberate care. A tunic of deep crimson trimmed with gold, hose of fine weave, and the gleaming belt that will gird the sovereign for court. They place them upon a carved chest, their movements measured, voices hushed to preserve the fragile stillness. Across the room, another door opens for the queen's ladies-in-waiting. They are noble maidens in silken kirtles, sleeves flowing like painted banners, their steps as light as whispered prayer. One tends the hearth, coaxing a livelier flame from the embers, while another draws back the canopy, allowing sunlight to spill across the bed. A third sets a basin of warmed rose water before the queen, the steam carrying its soft fragrance upward. The queen lets her fingertips rest in the water for a lingering moment, gaze drifting toward the brightening window. The rituals unfold in a quiet rhythm, a choreography shaped by years of repetition. Yet with each fastening of a clasp, each smoothing of fabric, the chamber's serenity thins. The hearth's gentle glow, once a shield against the world, fades in the mind, replaced by the steady rise of duty. The day presses forward, as inexorable as the sun climbing the sky. When the final ribbon is tied and the last clasp secured, the king and queen stand adorned not just in cloth and jewels, but in the solemn dignity of their station. Servants withdraw in silence, leaving only the monarchs and the quiet wait between them. They exchange a single glance, neither warm nor cold, but resolute. Beyond the chamber's arch, the corridor glows with torchlight, stretching toward the private chapel. Follow them now, past stone and shadow, to where the sacred duties of the crown begin. From the soft hush of the bedchamber, the monarchs move through a narrow, stone-lined corridor, their footsteps echoing faintly as they approach the heart of their morning ritual. The royal chapel stands apart from the grandeur of public worship, its walls close and intimate, its air cool and scented with devotion. Pale shafts of morning light fall through tall, stained glass windows, scattering jewel-like hues across the polished flagstones. Crimson, sapphire, and emerald fragments dance upon the carved oak pews, flickering like living gems as the first sunbeams shift. Along the altar, spirals of myrrh-scented smoke rise in slow, graceful patterns, curling toward the ribbed vaults overhead as though carrying whispered prayers into the heavens. The king and queen enter side by side, their expressions serene but solemn. Kneeling upon embroidered cushions, they bow their heads before the gilded crucifix, the quiet rustle of silk and velvet, the only sound before the liturgy begins. Their lips move in unison, shaping verses worn smooth by years of repetition, phrases in ancient Latin that bind their reign not just to the realm, but to the eternal order they are sworn to uphold. The rhythm of their prayer is steady and deliberate, like the turning of a great wheel, each word a link in an unbroken chain stretching back through centuries of kings and queens who sought divine favor before facing the burdens of rule. A priest in deep green vestments steps forward from the shadows beside the altar. His voice is low yet resonant, carrying with it a weight that seems to press into the still air. "May the Almighty guide your reign," he murmurs, his right hand sketching a slow, deliberate blessing in the air. The incense swirls around him, gilded by a shard of stained glass light, so that for a moment he appears less a man than a figure from some illuminated manuscript brought to life. The prayers continue, but a subtle shift begins to stir. What began as quiet communion between sovereigns and their God now grows into a gathering of resolve. The king's posture straightens, his voice firm though still hushed. The queen's eyes, once cast downward in reverence, now hold a quiet strength, as though each sacred vow spoken here is forging armor for the day ahead. The chapel seems to hold its breath, the stillness broken only by the soft cadence of ancient words and the muted crackle of candle flames. At last, the final verse fades into silence, and the monarchs remain kneeling for a heartbeat longer, absorbing the weight of the moment. Then rising together, they turn toward the door. The stained glass behind them blazes brighter now, the sun fully risen, casting their departing figures in a halo of fractured light. With each step, the air grows cooler, the scent of myrrh replaced by the faint tang of stone corridors and the distant murmur of servants stirring in the great hall. From the chapel's sanctity, they step into the demands of the court, carrying with them not just the blessing of the church, but the tempered resolve of rulers ready to meet the day. From the quiet sanctity of the chapel, the king and queen stepped into the living pulse of their realm. The air shifted from the cool, incense-laden stillness to the warmth of voices, the rustle of rich fabrics, and the measured tread of countless feet on polished stone. In the great hall, sunlight streamed through high, mullioned windows, scattering across banners that bore the colors of a dozen loyal houses. The space thrummed with movement. Velvet-clad nobles bowed with deliberate grace. Courtiers murmured in discreet clusters, and heralds strode between pillars to relay messages that seemed to carry the weight of kingdoms. At the heart of it all, the monarchs took their places, not merely as rulers, but as the axis around which this intricate machine turned. Their morning hours were claimed by councils, each heavy with decisions that shaped the fate of their subjects. One moment saw them listening to a grizzled baron disputing the borders of a fiefdom, his voice thick with years and grievance. The next, they heard a merchant's plea for safe passage through troubled lands. Between these audiences came brief interludes where scribes approached with parchment and seal, each document awaiting the sovereign's assent. Ceremony wove itself into governance. Messengers from far provinces bent the knee and presented tokens of loyalty. Silver coins struck with the monarch's likeness, or finely embroidered banners offered as tribute. Every action was steeped in formality, yet beneath the layers of ritual, a subtler truth stirred. These were two human beings carrying the immense burden of power. The king's jaw tightened as he weighed a judgment that could bring peace or unrest to an entire region. The queen's eyes, calm yet searching, lingered on the faces before her, as though she measured not only their words, but the shadows behind them. Even rulers wrapped in splendor bore the quiet unrest of the mortal heart. Their smiles sometimes faltered when an old wound, political or personal, was stirred. Fatigue softened their posture in rare, unguarded moments between petitions. Doubts whispered in the mind as surely as flatteries filled the air. Desire for justice, for legacy, for love, mingled with the unavoidable truth that power never allowed them to be wholly their own. And into this tapestry of grandeur and vulnerability would soon step a woman who embodied both the brilliance and the contradictions of her age. Eleanor of Aquitaine. She would not merely walk the corridors of power, she would command them with a presence as dazzling as it was formidable. A queen of fire and finesse, she was destined to alter not only the course of a reign, but the very shape of history. The scene began to shift, the day's affairs drawing toward a chapter more personal, more intimate in its telling. From the echoing court, the listener is now invited to travel back through time to the sunlit lands of Eleanor's youth and meet a queen whose story would define an era. In the year 1122, under the golden skies of southwestern France, Eleanor of Aquitaine entered the world as the cherished daughter of William Mex, Duke of Aquitaine. From the moment of her birth, destiny seemed to weave a grand tapestry around her life, one embroidered with the sunlit vineyards that stretched to the horizon, the fortified manors standing sentinel over winding rivers, and the deep, ancient songs of her homeland. Hers was a lineage that commanded not only wealth but also loyalty bound by centuries-old oaths, spoken in stone halls and sworn beneath cathedral arches. Eleanor's childhood was one of privilege and cultivation, yet it was far from idle. She was raised in the cultured courts of Aquitaine, where the arts were as revered as the sword. Tutors schooled her in Latin, Occitan, and French, ensuring her voice could carry across borders as deftly as a diplomat's. She learned music and poetry from troubadours who strummed their lutes in sun-dappled courtyards, their verses shaping her own wit and grace. Her mind was honed like a troubadour's lute, delicate in craftsmanship, yet capable of producing melodies that could charm, persuade, or unsettle the hearts of those who heard them. This education extended beyond books and ballads. Eleanor learned the subtleties of courtly politics from observing her father's counsels. She listened as vassals presented grievances, as alliances were forged with a goblet of wine and a quiet nod, and as disputes were settled with both firmness and tact. In these lessons, she understood that power was not only held in armies or coin, but in the art of reading a man's intent before he spoke it. The course of her life shifted abruptly when tragedy struck. In 1137, her father fell ill and died while on pilgrimage, leaving Eleanor, barely 15 years old, as the sole heir to one of the largest and most culturally vibrant realms in Europe. Her inheritance was no mere stretch of land. It was a realm of rolling hills and ancient oaths, bound together by the loyalty of knights, the toil of farmers, and the artistry of poets. It was a duchy that could inspire envy in kings and stir the ambitions of empires. In the wake of her father's death, Eleanor showed a composure that belied her youth. Surrounded by advisors eager to guide, or perhaps control her, she navigated the early days of her rule with a spirit unbound by convention. She wore her authority with an ease that unsettled those who expected a young woman to be pliable. Even in her teenage years, there was a spark in her gaze, a clear signal that she would not merely be a caretaker of her inheritance, but its active and unyielding defender. Yet her story was only beginning. The currents of politics and marriage would soon draw her into a union of crowns, one that promised both grandeur and challenge. Ahead lay the court of France, a new life beside King Louis VII, and a marriage that would test her fiery resolve in ways neither she nor the world could yet foresee. At just 15, Eleanor of Aquitaine became Queen of France. her fate sealed in a ceremony as grand as any medieval chronicle could recount. Inside the towering cathedral, sunlight fractured through stained glass, spilling rubies, sapphires, and gold onto the stone floor. The air was warm with the scent of beeswax candles, each flame swaying gently in the draft from the high arches above. Cloaked clergy intoned sacred Latin verses, their voices weaving solemn music through the nave as Eleanor and Louis VII exchanged vows, words that would bind a duchess of the sunlit south to a pious prince of the northern kingdom. In those early days, the French court seemed almost startled by its new queen. Eleanor brought with her the manners, artistry, and restless vitality of Aquitaine, a land where troubadours sang of honor and longing, and where beauty was as much a weapon as a gift. Within weeks, the cold stone halls of Paris began to echo with new melodies. Verses of chivalric devotion, airy with metaphor, gilded with romance. She hosted gatherings where poets recited under tapestries, and minstrels plucked strings until even the most solemn noble found his foot tapping beneath his robes. Louis, however, was made of quieter stuff. Raised for the church before fate thrust the crown upon his brow, he approached the world with the measured caution of a monk, his thoughts drawn more to scripture than to song. Eleanor, by contrast, was a falcon of open skies, swift, daring, and impatient with the confines of court etiquette. To her, a queen was not simply a silent jewel in the crown, but a presence to be felt, a force to be reckoned with. Their differences were not lost on the courtiers. Whispers flitted through the gilded corridors, some in awe, others in apprehension. One evening, after Eleanor's ladies had sung an Aquitanian ballad in the great hall, a silver-bearded noble was heard to murmur, "The queen's songs stir the heart, but not all hearts are ready to be stirred." Such remarks hinted at the unease that grew in the spaces between their affection, an unease born not of malice, but of mismatched worlds. Still, the early months of their union carried an air of optimism. Together they rode through the city gates, the people showering them with petals and cheers. Together, they presided over feasts where platters of roasted game and flagons of wine testified to the realm's prosperity. Yet even in these moments, a subtle tension lingered, like a harp string tuned too tight, ready to snap. For Louis, piety was the pillar of kingship. For Eleanor, vitality and vision were its lifeblood. Theirs was a partnership balanced on the edge of these two convictions, a fragile equilibrium that would soon be tested by the weight of history itself. Beyond the cathedral, beyond the courtly songs, the world was stirring. The Holy Land called for the faithful, and a crusade was forming, a journey that would carry them far from Paris, and even farther from the harmony they had yet to find. It was a summons neither could refuse, yet both would come to rue. And so, the Queen of Fire and Finesse would ride beside the King of Solemn Devotion into the dust and heat of the Second Crusade, a voyage destined to strain their bond to its breaking point. The call to the cross swept through Christendom like wildfire, and Eleanor of Aquitaine was not one to remain in the safety of her palace. Alongside her husband, King Louis VII, she set out, not merely as a royal consort, but as a leader in her own right. From the bustling ports of Europe to the sun-scorched plains of the Levant, the journey was a tapestry of contrasts. Cool stone chapels where prayers for victory echoed, and endless roads shimmering with heat beneath a pitiless sun. When the French host marched east, the scene was nothing short of breathtaking. Banners snapped in the desert wind, their colors vivid against the pale horizon. Armored knights rode with polished lances, while pilgrims trudged beside carts laden with supplies. At the heart of this army, Eleanor rode, not behind her husband in quiet deference, but at the head of her own retinue, her pennon flying. It was a bold defiance of tradition, a declaration that she was no mere ornament to royal power. Her presence became the talk of the camp, the duchess turned queen who dared to lead men into battle. Yet the Crusade's promise soon soured. The long march brought hunger, sickness, and discord. In the baking heat of Anatolia, men dropped from exhaustion. In the tangled politics of the Holy Land, alliances frayed and tempers flared. The grand aim, to retake Jerusalem, slipped further away with each passing month. Battles ended not in triumph, but in retreat, the weary soldiers returning with armor dented and dreams of glory buried in sand. For Eleanor and Louis, the journey was more than a military defeat. It was a crucible for their marriage. The gulf between them, once bridged by the excitement of youth and power, widened into something colder. Louis, pious and withdrawn, sought solace in the council of monks. Eleanor, fiery and pragmatic, questioned his decisions openly, her sharp words cutting deeper than any enemy's sword. Around the campfires, whispers grew, of disagreements in the royal tent, of a queen whose independence unsettled the king's sense of order. When the battered French army finally turned west, the return voyage carried more than weary bodies. It bore the weight of disappointment, mistrust, and a bond stretched to breaking. The holy cause had failed. The royal marriage was following suit. The crusade had begun as a grand adventure, a stage upon which Eleanor could display her courage and command. But it ended as a somber chapter, a march through heat and hardship that stripped away illusions. The chasm between king and queen was no longer a hairline crack. It was an open wound, raw and unhealed. And in its shadow, the inevitable loomed. France's king and queen would not remain bound forever. Ahead lay an annulment, one that would free Eleanor for a destiny even greater and far more dangerous. The year was 1152, and the echoes of the Second Crusade had long since faded into the dust. Yet for Eleanor, Duchess of Aquitaine and Queen of France, the weight of an ill-matched union still hung heavy. The papal court had deliberated, parchment rustled beneath candlelight, and at last, in a chamber deep within the Vatican's stone heart, a seal was pressed into wax, an ending made official. With that single gesture, 2 decades of strained marriage dissolved into history. If some saw the annulment as scandal, Eleanor bore it with the calm of one accustomed to storms. She did not shrink into shadows or retreat to quiet cloisters. Instead, she emerged with the poise of a phoenix rising from marital ashes, her wings spread wider than before. In the courtly gossip that swept through Europe, her name was no longer tethered to Louis. Now she stood alone, and yet, not diminished. Her duchy remained hers, a realm of sun-blessed vineyards, rolling green hills, and rivers guarded by weathered stone keeps. It was a prize unlike any other, its wealth and strategic reach rivaling the holdings of many crowned monarchs. Suitors began circling almost before the ink on the papal decree had dried. In Paris, a noble was overheard whispering to his companion, her lands could shift the balance of power in Christendom. It was not merely her beauty, wit, or formidable presence that drew men toward her. Though these were undeniable, it was her political gravity, the knowledge that to marry Eleanor was to inherit influence enough to redraw borders. Eleanor, for her part, knew her worth. She entertained overtures with a measured smile, reading between lines and weighing promises against her own ambitions. She had learned, painfully, that love without parity was a frail foundation for a throne. This time, she would choose a partner not only to share her bed, but to match her will. Freedom tasted different at 40 than it might have in youth. It was sharper now, tempered by experience and loss, but it was also more dangerous, for both her and the men who sought to claim her. In the span of weeks, she rejected 2 prominent suitors, their offers either too weak or too eager. Rumor had it one rode away muttering that the Duchess's spirit was as untamable as the western seas. The roads of Aquitaine bustled that spring with messengers, envoys, and the occasional disguised prince, all eager to secure an audience. Eleanor moved among them like a chess master, seeing beyond the present move to the game's end. Every meeting, every letter, every glance was a step toward the alliance she envisioned, one that could not merely secure her lands, but alter the course of kingdoms. And then came the name that would change everything. Henry, Duke of Normandy and heir to the English throne. Young, ambitious, and formidable, he possessed a will that mirrored her own. Their meeting would not be the polite courtship of poetry, but the forging of a political storm. It was a union that would redraw the map of Europe, and Eleanor, newly free, was ready to claim it. The wedding was neither quiet nor modest. Beneath the vaulted Norman arches of a grand cathedral in Poitiers, light streamed through stained glass, scattering jeweled colors across the stone floor. Priests chanted in low, solemn cadence as Eleanor of Aquitaine, resplendent in a gown of gold-threaded silk, took the hand of the young, fierce Henry Plantagenet. The scent of incense hung thick in the air, mingling with the metallic tang of candle smoke. Around them, nobles and knights from across Europe gathered, some to witness history, others to measure the shifting balance of power. Henry was barely 20, yet already a force to be reckoned with, quick to laugh, quicker to anger, and endlessly ambitious. Eleanor, 10 years his senior, matched him in wit, confidence, and appetite for power. When they swore their vows, their voices did not tremble. These were not lovers lost in a dream, but sovereigns sealing a pact, two wills binding themselves to a future as formidable as the stone walls surrounding them. From this union, a vast dominion was forged. The marriage joined Eleanor's Aquitaine to Henry's holdings in Normandy and Anjou, soon to be crowned with the English throne. Their empire stretched from the misty highlands of Scotland to the sunlit peaks of the Pyrenees. Castles rose like sentinels over green valleys, ports swelled with merchant ships, and the court glittered with poets, diplomats, and warlords. Yet Eleanor was no passive consort. She wielded her influence like a scepter, advising on treaties, appointing loyal vassals, and ensuring her southern lands retained their distinct culture and autonomy. She brought with her the refined traditions of Aquitaine, troubadour poetry, elaborate pageantry, and a courtly grace that softened the edges of Henry's blunt pragmatism. Together, they were a spectacle. The restless young king and the brilliant Duchess Queen, commanding loyalty and envy in equal measure. But beneath the triumph lay shadows. Henry's ambition burned hot, consuming everything in its path, and Eleanor's pride was equally fierce. Their alliance was built on shared power, but also on two relentless egos. Those who looked closely could see it. The way Henry's jaw tightened when Eleanor challenged him in council. The sharp glint in her eyes when his decisions brushed too close to her authority. In private, there were moments of warmth, banquets where laughter rang under high timbered ceilings, nights when the wind off the channel rattled the shutters and they plotted the next conquest together. Yet even in these moments, ambition hovered like a third presence in the marriage, whispering of crowns, borders, and legacy. A dynasty was about to be born, one that would shape the fate of kingdoms. Sons and daughters would grow amid this splendor and tension, heirs not only to vast lands, but to the fiery will of both parents. And so, with vows sworn beneath Norman arches and an empire taking shape beneath their feet, Eleanor and Henry began their reign, triumphant, watchful, and already sensing that power, once joined, could just as easily divide. In the grand, echoing halls of the Angevin palaces, Eleanor's life unfolded as a tapestry rich in color and complexity. She bore 8 children, each one a thread woven into the dynastic ambitions of Europe. Among them were 2 who would shape history with iron will and unyielding spirit: Richard, destined to be the Lionheart, and John, whose reign would be marked by turmoil. In the quiet moments between affairs of state, she could be seen cradling a swaddled infant in a chamber hung with woven scenes of hunts and battles, the air scented faintly with beeswax and rosemary. Servants moved softly across rush-strewn floors, mindful of the queen's gaze, for even in domesticity, Eleanor carried herself with regal poise. But Eleanor's influence reached far beyond the nursery. At Poitiers, she transformed her court into a living poem, a sanctuary where art, music, and ideas mingled as freely as the wine in silver goblets. Troubadours, draped in rich fabrics and carrying lutes worn smooth from years of song, found in her patronage both refuge and purpose. She invited poets, philosophers, and wandering storytellers to her salons, where flickering candlelight danced over carved beams and embroidered tapestries. It was here that the ideals of courtly romance found fertile ground, taking root in verses that would echo across the courts of Christendom. One troubadour, kneeling after a performance, was said to murmur, Her grace inspires our songs. Without her light, our music is but shadow. These gatherings were not mere entertainments. They were instruments of soft power. In celebrating love, honor, and chivalry, Eleanor cultivated loyalty and shaped the values of the nobility. Young knights, fresh from their first campaigns, learned that prowess with the sword must be tempered by courtesy at the table. Noblewomen, emboldened by the Queen's presence, found new space to speak, advise, and inspire. The court at Poitiers became a beacon, drawing minds and hearts as surely as armies marched toward banners. Yet beneath the golden sheen of culture, the foundations of Eleanor's marriage to Henry Plantagenet began to shift. The years had brought them victories, lands, and children, but also distance. Where once their ambitions had run side by side, now they pulled in separate directions, his toward the ceaseless expansion of power, hers toward the cultivation of legacy and influence. Their partnership, once tightly bound, began to fray like worn silk at the edges. Words between them, once quick with shared purpose, grew measured and edged. Still, Eleanor moved through her roles with unshaken composure. She was a mother, a queen, a patron of the arts, and a political force in her own right, each role informing the others. Her children grew in an atmosphere steeped in both grandeur and tension, learning early that the corridors of power were as full of whispered alliances as they were of open ceremony. And somewhere in the rhythm of courtly dances and diplomatic negotiations, an unspoken truth settled over the royal household. A storm was gathering. The seeds of rebellion, planted in the soil of ambition, rivalry, and fractured trust, had begun to take root. Soon, the warmth of Eleanor's cultural legacy would stand in stark contrast to the cold winds of political strife that threatened to sweep through the royal family. The year 1173 brought with it not just the turning of the seasons, but the turning of hearts within England's royal family. Whispers of discontent, once quiet as candle smoke in cathedral corners, thickened into open talk of defiance. Henry and Eleanor's sons, bold, ambitious, and restless, looked upon their father's rule as a barrier to their own destinies. And behind the polished doors of Eleanor's chambers, counsel was given not as idle musings, but as sparks cast upon dry tinder. She did not command outright rebellion. She ignited it with the precision of a seasoned strategist, her words sharper than any sword. Like a lioness rallying her cubs, she instilled in them the belief that their claws were meant for more than idle display. The alliance was unprecedented, a family turned against its own patriarch. The young Henry, Richard, and Geoffrey joined forces with discontented nobles and even reached beyond England's borders for allies. Riders galloped between courts in France, carrying missives sealed with urgency and ambition. Eleanor's voice, though never heard on the battlefield, was present in every bold stroke of the rebellion's plans. It was her vision of a kingdom reshaped that gave her sons their cause, her strategic mind mapping out each move as though arranging the pieces on a gilded chessboard. Yet, war is not played upon a board, and the world beyond parchment is treacherous. Henry Plantagenet, seasoned by years of both conquest and governance, struck back with a swiftness that outpaced his enemies. Fortresses that had been expected to hold for months fell within weeks. Armies scattered before his advance. The rebellion's alliances began to splinter, each defeat hammering cracks deeper into their cause. What had begun as a blazing revolt now crumbled like a breached wall, its defenders fleeing through the dust and ruin. When Eleanor's role became undeniable, Henry's fury was not the cold, controlled wrath of a statesman. It was personal, a wound carved into the heart of his pride. Standing before his council, he gave a decree that rang like iron striking iron. She shall know the cost of betrayal. His voice, deep and unyielding, left no doubt that the punishment would be both swift and severe. Eleanor's arrest was not a spectacle of chains and jeers, but a quiet, deliberate act of removal. She was intercepted while traveling, her entourage scattered, her letters seized. Stripped of her freedom, she was taken into confinement, a queen whose crown weighed heavier than ever before. The cold stone walls of her new prison did not dampen her spirit, but they narrowed her world to shadows and silence. Still, captivity could not break her. Even in seclusion, she remained a presence that haunted Henry's court. A queen confined but unbroken, her reputation still powerful enough to stir unrest. The rebellion had failed, the cubs subdued, but the lioness still breathed. And in that breath lay the seed of future defiance, waiting for its season to rise again. Beyond those prison walls, the kingdom returned to uneasy order, but the air carried the aftertaste of betrayal. The storm had passed, but the horizon was far from clear. Soon, another chapter of Eleanor's life would unfold, one where the bars of her cell would become the backdrop to a queen's patience and her unyielding will. The year was marked not by seasons, but by the sound of iron hinges closing behind her. Henry's wrath had been swift and unrelenting, and for 16 long years, Eleanor was carried like a guarded treasure, though one kept under lock and key, from one stone fortress to another. At Winchester, the air was damp and smelled faintly of moss. At Salisbury, the wind clawed at the shutters through long winter nights. Wherever she was sent, the walls stood cold and unyielding, yet they echoed with her own silent vow to endure. Servants came and went under strict watch, their eyes avoiding hers, as if fearing her gaze might carry the weight of a queen's command. Though her world had shrunk to narrow corridors and guarded chambers, Eleanor's spirit remained unyielding as iron. She read what she could, conversed when permitted, and wove strategies in her mind like threads on a hidden loom. In her solitude, she rehearsed the histories of her ancestors and considered the battles yet to come, not with swords perhaps, but with patience, influence, and a will sharpened by captivity. The news from beyond her walls was often cruel. One son's reckless ambition ended in disaster. Another's life was claimed by sickness. Each loss carved grief into her heart as deeply as a mason's chisel into stone. She received these tidings in letters or whispered words from trusted messengers, and though she mourned, she never let despair master her. "My sons," she once wrote in a rare letter that escaped the censor's grasp, "hold fast to our legacy. The crown is not only gold, but the honor you must keep." Henry, for his part, did not relent. The years rolled on, the dust of seasons settling in the high corners of her chambers. She was moved again and again, perhaps to keep her isolated, perhaps to keep her under his watchful reach. But each relocation only confirmed to her that she was still dangerous to him, dangerous because she still mattered. Visitors were few, but when they came, they left with a sense of her quiet power. She asked questions no prisoner should ask, gave advice no queen in chains should give. Even in constraint, she found ways to remain a figure of influence, as if her crown, though invisible, still rested firmly on her brow. And then, in the 16th year, whispers began of changing tides, of Henry's failing health, of shifting loyalties in the court. The first hints of freedom came not with trumpet fanfare, but in the subtle loosening of restrictions. A longer walk in the courtyard, a less watchful guard. For Eleanor, these were not just privileges, they were signs that the shadow was thinning, and that dawn, after so many years of darkness, might be at hand. A queen confined she had been, but unbroken she remained. The gates groaned open on a late summer day in 1189, and Eleanor stepped into sunlight, unbowed. 16 years of confinement had not dimmed her gaze. If anything, it burned sharper, as though the darkness had only honed her. The air beyond the castle walls carried the scent of grass and earth, a perfume she had almost forgotten. No guards trailed her now, not as captors, but as escorts. It was Richard, newly crowned and eager for his mother's counsel, who had ordered her release, and in that moment, the bonds of iron were replaced with the bonds of duty. At 67, an age when many retreated from public affairs, Eleanor rode not toward retirement, but toward power. Richard's crusading ambitions meant England needed a steady hand, and he placed the kingdom in hers without hesitation. She accepted not as a favor, but as a right, mounting the seat of governance with the assurance of someone who had weathered storms and still held the compass. The court in her regency years became a stage, and Eleanor was its maestro conducting a realm. She balanced the demands of nobles, managed the flow of taxes for the crusade, and soothed unrest with the precision of a healer stitching a deep wound. Petitions came daily, each heard with a listening ear and a decisive voice. Her authority did not thunder, it resonated. One courtier, speaking in quiet awe after a council session, murmured, "The Queen Mother's wisdom holds the crown steady." The words spread in the hallways of power, becoming both acknowledgement and warning. To oppose her was to risk destabilizing the very realm. It was a season of triumph for Eleanor, and she carried herself like a beacon of resilience, her very presence a reminder that survival could evolve into mastery. The long years of imprisonment had not corroded her influence. They had distilled it, turning her will into something both formidable and refined. Her regency was marked by deft diplomacy. She corresponded with foreign rulers, arranged strategic marriages, and kept England's coffers and conscience aligned with the king's crusading cause. When news from Richard's campaigns arrived, she weighed each line like a jeweler, judging the cut of a gem, determining how it would shape the kingdom's next move. There was pride in her work, not the vanity of conquest, but the deep satisfaction of proving that her twilight years could blaze as brightly as her youth. She was no figurehead. She was the pivot on which the kingdom turned. Yet even in the glow of achievement, Eleanor knew her stewardship would not last forever. The years, though generous to her spirit, were finite to her body. Still, she was determined to forge a legacy in these closing chapters, one that would outlast the fleeting memory of crowns and wars. The road ahead led toward her final years, but not in surrender. It led toward the culmination of a life where triumph had been hammered from adversity, a legacy forged in her twilight. At 77, when most nobles had long surrendered the saddle, Eleanor marched with the vigor of youth to defend her son John's claim to the throne. In the chill of early spring, she rode at the head of her forces, her banner rippling like fire against the gray sky. The siege that followed tested not only her body, but the endurance of her will. The stone walls and iron gates of her enemies yielded as much to her reputation as to her soldiers' arms. Few could stand against a queen whose very life had been a tapestry of victories carved from hardship. These final campaigns did not diminish her. They burnished her image, as if time itself bowed in recognition of her resolve. Her political instincts, honed over decades of ruling and surviving, ensured that England remained in the hands of her bloodline. And when the fighting subsided, she returned to the place where her story would end, Fontevraud Abbey, not in exile or disgrace, but as a figure honored in her own lifetime. In the spring of 1204, at the age of 82, Eleanor's long journey reached its quiet conclusion. Within the abbey's cool stone halls, lit by the golden spill of candlelight, she lay in her chamber, the air faint with incense and the distant echo of Gregorian chant. As the sun slipped below the horizon, she closed her eyes, a queen resting in sacred silence. The years had taken her strength, but not her dignity. She left the world as she had lived in it, on her own terms. Her death was more than the passing of a monarch. It was the closing of an era. Chroniclers of her time recorded her deeds with a mix of awe and disbelief, for she had moved through the medieval world like a force of nature. A modern historian, centuries later, would write simply, "Her name echoes through the ages, capturing in 6 words what countless volumes struggled to convey." Eleanor's legacy was not merely that of a ruler or a mother of kings. She had shattered the chains of convention that bound women to the margins of history. In courts and on battlefields, in treaties and in the tapestry of alliances, she proved that intellect and authority were not the birthright of men alone. Her life's arc defied the expectations of her age, redefining what it meant to be both a queen and a sovereign in her own right. The people who walked past her tomb in the years after her death did so with reverence, for they knew they were in the presence of a story that had refused to be small. Even now, her effigy lies beside those of Henry and Richard, carved in stone yet alive in memory. Her story mirrors the era's contradictions, a time of chivalry and cruelty, of rigid hierarchies and unexpected freedoms, of war that could destroy kingdoms and women who could rule them. In Eleanor's life, The medieval world revealed both its harshest limits and its rarest possibilities. History often paints monarchs as distant figures, polished portraits, stiff in pose, their lives measured in battles and treaties. But pull back the gilded curtain, and you find something far more relatable. Flesh and blood beneath gilded crowns. Kings and queens were not just symbols of power, they were parents, lovers, rivals, and dreamers, wrestling with the same emotions that have stirred humankind for centuries. Eleanor of Aquitaine's life is a prime example, a life stitched from a tapestry of ambition and heartbreak, resilience and loss. She was not a flawless icon. She was a woman who fought for her family, defied her husband, and endured years of confinement without surrendering her will. Her victories were hard-won, her defeats deeply felt. It is easy, from the safety of hindsight, to measure her by her crowns and titles. But her true legacy lies not just in the lands she ruled or the sons she raised to thrones, but in the human core that endured beneath it all. She knew love and betrayal, triumph and grief, emotions as ancient as humanity itself. Her story invites us to look closer at the rulers we so often see only in grandeur. Monarchs, like the rest of us, carried the weight of echoes of our own hopes and fears, the longing for security, the sting of betrayal, the determination to shape the future for those they cared about. Their castles may have been larger, their feasts grander, but their struggles were deeply, achingly human. Eleanor's endurance through personal loss, political storms, and public scrutiny reminds us that history's great figures are not marble statues, but beating hearts. As the narrator muses, in their hearts, we find our own. Perhaps this is why her story still resonates, not because she was perfect, but because she was imperfect in ways we recognize, yet unyielding in ways we aspire to be. The past, then, is not a foreign country. It is a mirror. Through it, we see the persistence of ambition, the fragility of trust, and the enduring need for courage. Whether in the 12th century or the 21st, the human experience binds us across the centuries. Eleanor's journey ends, but the lesson lingers. Power cannot insulate anyone from sorrow, nor can privilege erase the need for hope. And as one story closes, another begins. Different crown, different kingdom, but the same intertwining of humanity and rule. Now, the light shifts toward another chapter in the long, intricate chronicle of monarchy. From Eleanor's resilience to Edward III's legacy of splendor, we step into a new tale, one woven with chivalry, ceremony, and a fellowship that would shape the very fabric of medieval knighthood, the birth of the Order of the Garter. Edward III came to the throne as a young man with fire in his eyes, and a vision that stretched beyond the borders of England. In an age where the sword was as much a tool of diplomacy as parchment and seal, he forged a chivalric beacon, a code of honor and fellowship that would shape his reign. His idea was bold yet simple, to bind his greatest knights not just to him, but to each other, through a shared oath and a symbol they would wear with pride. Thus, the Order of the Garter was born. The emblem was no mere ornament. It was a sapphire ribbon clasped around the leg, a vivid streak of loyalty and valor. To wear it was to be part of an elite brotherhood whose members were bound by honor, courage, and service to the realm. In the candlelit halls of Windsor, these chosen knights would gather in solemn ceremony, their armor gleaming beneath tapestries that told the legends they hoped to live up to. Edward's Windsor was no cold fortress. It was a living, breathing heart of culture. Minstrels tuned their lutes in the echoing galleries, poets recited verses to ladies in jeweled gowns, and chroniclers scribbled furiously to keep pace with the unfolding grandeur. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax and spiced wine, the hum of conversation mingling with the clink of goblets. The king understood that a court was not just a seat of governance. It was a stage where the image of the monarchy was performed and perfected. In one such gathering, a knight stepped forward before the assembled court. Dropping to one knee before the king, he spoke words that would echo through centuries. By honor, we serve the realm. By loyalty, we serve the king. And by courage, we serve all. Edward nodded, his hand resting on the knight's shoulder, sealing the vow in a gesture both personal and symbolic. The Order of the Garter became more than just a fraternity of warriors. It was a statement of ideals in an age often ruled by ambition and cruelty. Each feast, each tournament, each carefully staged display of pageantry reinforced the vision Edward had for his realm, that strength must be tempered by honor and that power must wear the cloak of virtue. Yet beyond the laughter of feasts and the shimmer of banners, there lingered a quiet truth. Even in an age of splendor, faith was the final arbiter. Edward knew that no crown gleamed forever, and no hall rang with laughter without end. There were chapels in Windsor where candle flames swayed before carved saints, reminding even the proudest knight that glory on earth was fleeting, and that every triumph must one day bow before the altar. And so, as the music faded and the revelers retired, the king's vision of chivalry remained, woven into the very stone of Windsor and carried in the hearts of those who had sworn the oath. Transition. Yet even splendor bowed to faith, and in the great halls where lords once feasted, prayers would rise in whispers, heralding the next chapter in the story of kings. In the medieval imagination, the crown was not merely a political ornament, it was a covenant with the heavens. Monarchs were seen as stewards of divine will, charged with shepherding their realms in both worldly justice and spiritual righteousness. Faith was not a private matter, but the foundation upon which authority rested. Every public gesture, from the sign of the cross before battle to the endowment of monasteries, was meant to affirm a ruler's place in God's plan. The day for a king or queen often began before sunrise, when the castle's corridors still lay in shadow and the air held the faint chill of night. They would step quietly into the royal chapel, where candles cast a halo on stone walls and incense drifted like whispered prayers. Here, amidst the solemn chants of the clergy, the monarch would kneel, not as a sovereign above all, but as a soul beneath God. These morning masses were both devotion and declaration, a reminder to all present that earthly power was subject to a higher throne. Among the great exemplars of royal piety stood Louis IX of France, remembered by history as St. Louis. Though he commanded armies and expanded his realm, his heart was fixed firmly upon God. He embraced a life of humble devotion, wearing simple robes in private and washing the feet of the poor. His court, though splendid, was governed by the rhythms of prayer, scripture reading, and acts of charity. To Louis, the crown was not a privilege, but a burden to be carried with grace and sacrifice. Chroniclers tell of one morning when, as rain lashed against the chapel windows, Louis led his household in prayer before embarking on a diplomatic journey. "Guide us, O Lord, in your light," he intoned, his voice steady against the storm. Those present said the words lingered in the air long after the service ended, as though heaven itself had paused to listen. Such devout rulers sought to weave faith into the very fabric of governance. They endowed abbeys, founded hospitals, and observed the cycle of holy feasts with fervor. On Easter, the monarch might be seen barefoot in procession, carrying a relic through the streets. On Christmas, they would feed the poor with their own hands. Religion was not confined to the chapel, but was present in council chambers, on battlefields, and in the laws they decreed. Yet piety could also serve as a political instrument. Public displays of devotion reassured subjects of the monarch's righteousness and deterred rivals who might hesitate to challenge one favored by God. Still, for rulers like Louis IX, faith was no mere performance. It was a compass in both triumph and trial. The grandeur of medieval kingship shone brightest when tempered by such humility. In the interplay of crown and cross, the medieval world found its ideal, a ruler whose authority was both earthly and sacred. Yet not all monarchs walked so holy a path, and in the shadow of piety, tales of greed, cruelty, and ambition remind us that the divine calling could be easily ignored. The next chapter turns to those whose rule drifted from grace, revealing the fragile balance between faith and power. In the great tapestry of history, the threads of faith and power do not all gleam with equal light. Some monarchs, like Louis IX, wore their crowns as sacred trusts, while others used them as instruments of personal ambition. The spectrum of royal conduct stretched from sanctity to scandal, revealing how differently the mantle of divine stewardship could be borne. Louis IX's reign remains a shining testament to the possibility of holiness in high office, a crown tempered by penance. His governance reflected not only political acumen, but also a deep sense of spiritual accountability. Acts of mercy, personal austerity, and tireless charity marked his rule. He led not by fear, but by example, inspiring nobles and commoners alike to live in greater accord with their faith. Chroniclers described him as a king who loved God more than his own life. And in Louis's hands, the crown seemed almost to bend under the weight of humility. Yet such saintly examples stand in stark relief against rulers whose ambitions led them far from the path of piety. Henry VIII of England, in the flush of personal desire, shattered sacred bonds for love. His decision to sever his realm from centuries of Catholic unity was not cloaked in theological reform alone. It was driven by a longing for a new marriage and the heir it might bring. In doing so, he placed personal will above ecclesiastical tradition, reshaping the religious map of Europe in ways still felt today. To some, he was a reformer. To others, a monarch willing to barter the eternal for the fleeting. If Henry's defiance was rooted in personal desire, the papacy of Alexander VI was marred by open indulgence. History remembers him as a pontiff cloaked in vice, whose court was more often filled with intrigue and lavish feasts than with the solemn work of shepherding souls. Nepotism, political manipulation, and rumors of moral corruption clung to his name. To the faithful who looked to Rome for moral clarity, his example was a bitter reminder that even the highest spiritual office could be stained by earthly greed. As one chronicler grimly observed, their sins cast shadows on the throne. Such shadows did not only dim the rulers themselves, they cast long, dark lines across the trust of their subjects, eroding the perception that kings and popes were always the chosen stewards of divine will. Yet the truth of royal history lies not in extremes alone. Between saintliness and scandal stretched a wide terrain of compromise, ambition, devotion, and pragmatism. Many rulers, while professing sincere faith, found themselves navigating the treacherous waters of politics, war, and personal alliances, waters in which the clean lines of piety often blurred. It was in such a world that Eleanor moved with skill. Though not a ruler in her own right in the same sense as a king, her political savvy navigated such tensions. She could bend toward devotion when the moment required, yet turn toward strategy when faith alone would not serve her aims. In her story, the interplay between belief and ambition takes center stage, offering a more nuanced vision of what it meant to hold power in a world where crowns gleamed in both light and shadow. Eleanor of Aquitaine's life was a masterclass in the art of wielding influence, not merely in the public spectacle of rule, but in the quieter, calculated choices that shaped kingdoms. From the very beginning, she treated dynastic unions not as matters of the heart alone, but as moves in a chessboard of alliances. Her first marriage to Louis VII bound Aquitaine to the French crown, elevating her from duchess to queen. Yet when that match proved politically stagnant, she navigated an annulment with the precision of a strategist clearing a blocked path. Her subsequent marriage to Henry Plantagenet, future Henry II of England, was a stroke that redrew the map of power in Western Europe. In one lifetime, she shifted the balance between two of the most formidable monarchies of her age. Her influence was not confined to the marriage bed or the council chamber. In Poitiers, she presided over a haven of lyrical splendor, where troubadours wove tales of chivalry and nobility under her patronage. The culture she fostered did more than entertain. It shaped ideals of courtly conduct, refining how the powerful displayed honor, love, and loyalty. These gatherings were as political as they were poetic, for in the dance of verse and gesture, Eleanor reinforced her position as a cultural authority whose court rivaled any in Christendom. But the arc of her life was not without shadows. Her later rebellion against Henry II, a bold gamble in the ceaseless game of power, ended with her capture and long imprisonment. For years, she lived with her movements controlled and her voice stifled, a spirit caged yet unyielding. The stone walls that enclosed her could not contain her influence entirely. Her mind and will still reached beyond them. Through intermediaries, she counseled her sons, guiding their ambitions and urging them toward unity in the face of danger. One such message survives in the echo of a son's words: "Mother, your counsel lights our path." In that simple line lies the truth of Eleanor's enduring power, not the ceremonial authority of a crown, but the invisible, persuasive force of a trusted mind. Even in confinement, she shaped destinies, the strategist's instinct never leaving her. Eleanor's political life was a constant negotiation between power and survival, influence and endurance. She could play the role of the gracious queen in a hall filled with music and poetry. Then, when the moment demanded, transform into the shrewd tactician who turned personal setbacks into political openings. Her ability to adapt, without ever surrendering her sense of authority, was the thread that ran through each chapter of her story. Now, as her influence continued to ripple through the Plantagenet dynasty, history was preparing to introduce another formidable figure, Matilda, a woman whose own defiance would test the boundaries of female authority in a world designed to contain it. Like Eleanor, she would learn that power was rarely given freely, and that to hold it, one had to be willing to fight in ways the world did not expect of women. In the winter of 1102, under the vaulted shadows of a royal chamber, a daughter was born to King Henry I of England, one whose life would be shaped by ambition, diplomacy, and an unyielding sense of destiny. From her earliest years, Matilda's world was steeped not in idle luxury, but in a childhood steeped in regal promise. She learned the weight of a crown before she could comprehend the power it symbolized, surrounded by the ceremonies, oaths, and alliances that stitched together the medieval realm. The daughter of a king was never just a child, she was a vessel of dynastic intent. By the age of 8, that intent was already charting her path beyond England's shores. She was sent across the sea to Germany to wed Henry V, the Holy Roman Emperor, a match that elevated her from royal daughter to empress-in-waiting. The wedding was no mere courtly affair. It was the binding of two realms, the English crown extending its influence into the heart of Europe. She stood beneath cathedral arches and imperial banners, the vows spoken over her head as much a political treaty as a marital union. In those moments, she was a crown gleaming in German halls, radiant not for her jewels alone, but for the promise she carried between kingdoms. Life in the imperial court tested and refined her. The Holy Roman Empire was a stage of intricate politics, where alliances could be won or lost with a gesture, a word, or a pause. Matilda adapted quickly, learning the subtleties of courtly negotiation, the value of silence as well as speech. Her education was no small matter of etiquette. It was an immersion in the mechanics of empire. Tutors honed her command of Latin, the language of diplomacy and governance, while scholars and clerics exposed her to histories, laws, and philosophies. She carried herself with the quiet authority of a mind sharp as a scepter, keen to rule not as a figurehead, but as a sovereign in her own right. Those around her recognized the rare fusion of youth and authority she embodied. One courtier, in a letter sent to England, described her with a kind of awe. "The Empress shines like a star, and all the court bends toward her light." Such words were not idle flattery. They were an acknowledgement that Matilda's presence carried weight in matters of state. She stood beside the emperor not as a silent consort, but as a partner whose counsel he valued, whose dignity reflected his own power. For nearly a decade, Matilda moved through the courts of the empire, a figure both admired and scrutinized, learning the delicate balance between command and concession. But fate, in its unrelenting pace, would soon alter the course of her life. In 1125, Henry V died, leaving her a widow before she had reached her mid-20s. The imperial crown was no longer hers to wear, yet the lessons, the alliances, and the authority she had cultivated remained firmly in her grasp. She would return to England not as the child who had left, but as a woman shaped by empire and loss, carrying the weight of a title she could no longer claim. A widow's resolve would face new trials, and the struggle ahead would test her as neither marriage nor courtly life ever had. The winter sky over England was a muted silver, when Matilda's ship cut through the cold surf. She stepped onto ancestral soil with a measured grace, her boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air carried the scent of salt and frost, a reminder that the realm she sought to rule was as unyielding as the sea itself. Behind her trailed attendants and guards, their banners snapping in the wind, a quiet herald to a royal daughter come home. Her return was not the hesitant step of an exile, but the purposeful stride of one destined for the crown. Years earlier, her father, King Henry I, had gathered his lords in solemn assembly. The chamber had been heavy with torchlight and expectation when he spoke the words that bound them, a vow to crown a daughter. His voice had carried the weight of command, and the barons, reluctant though some were, had knelt and pledged. That night, Henry's will seemed unshakable, his design fixed as surely as the stars over Westminster. But vows made in the glow of ceremony often falter in the chill of reality. In the months following Henry's death, the undercurrent of dissent rose to the surface. Whispers curled in the corners of great halls, and the phrase, "a queen's scepter," was spoken not with pride, but with scorn. Lords who had bent the knee now leaned on old prejudices, their voices laced with the iron certainty that no woman could bear the burden of England's throne. In one such council, a baron of grizzled beard and weathered armor spoke with blunt disdain. "A woman cannot rule us," he declared, his fist thudding against the oak table. The words rippled through the chamber like a stone cast into still water. Some nodded, others kept their silence. But the seed of defiance had been planted, and it would soon choke the fragile shoots of loyalty. Matilda heard these sentiments, and they hardened her resolve. She was no stranger to courts where intrigue moved like smoke, and she knew the worth of steel in both hand and spirit. Her time as Holy Roman Empress had not been wasted on pomp alone. It had taught her the machinery of power, the necessity of allies, and the patience to strike when the moment demanded. As winter deepened, the question of succession no longer lingered in debate, but flared toward conflict. Stephen of Blois, swift to act where others hesitated, seized the crown in London, claiming legitimacy by speed and cunning. To Matilda, it was nothing less than theft, a betrayal not only of her, but of the oath sworn to her father. The realm began to divide, the old order buckling under the weight of competing claims. The roads between manors grew dangerous, loyalty shifted with the wind, and the crown itself became the most perilous prize in Christendom. Yet Matilda did not waver. She gathered her supporters, secured fortresses, and prepared for the contest to come. The time for oaths and ceremony had passed. Now, England would decide its ruler not by promise, but by the spilling of blood. A throne contested in blood, such was the fate awaiting the realm. The realm was torn by rival crowns, its very soul rent asunder in a tempest of steel and ambition. This was the anarchy, a time when England's fields ran red, and the banners of Matilda and Stephen clashed like thunder across the land. Lords shifted allegiances like restless shadows, and once peaceful manors became battlegrounds where loyalty and survival were measured by sword and blood. In the midst of this chaos, Matilda pressed forward with unyielding determination. Her forces swept into London, the city's ancient walls echoing with the cries of a people hungry for order. For a fleeting moment, she sat a queen enthroned amid cheers, her presence a beacon of hope to her loyal followers. The great halls hummed with new purpose, and the streets bore witness to a ruler reclaiming her birthright. Yet this triumph was but a fragile flame in the tempest. Stephen's forces rallied swiftly, his grip on the city tightening like a noose. The tide turned mercilessly as Matilda found herself driven from the city's heart, forced to flee beneath the cloak of night and the whispered prayers of those who still believed. "For Matilda, we fight!" came the rallying cry of a steadfast supporter, a voice rising above the din of war. Such loyalty was her armor, yet even it could not shield her from the relentless storms of conflict. Her struggle was marked by moments of courage and crushing setbacks, a dance of hope and despair that stretched across years. The anarchy left scars not only on the land, but on the spirit of a queen who refused to bow. As exhaustion seeped into every corner of the realm, the brutal contest softened into a weary compromise. Neither crown could claim absolute victory, and so the stage was set for a fragile peace, born not of strength, but of shared fatigue. After years of bitter strife and shattered dreams, a pact was finally sealed in weary halls, an accord born not from triumph, but from exhaustion. The realm, long torn by rival crowns, sought a fragile peace, and in this solemn agreement, the path to stability was carved. The pact recognized Henry, Matilda's son, as the rightful heir to the throne. A crown passed through her blood and tenacity. Though she had fought fiercely for her own rule, it was through Henry that her legacy would be firmly planted. The weight of her struggle bore fruit not in her own reign, but in the rise of a dynasty destined to shape centuries. In the quiet moments after the accord, Matilda's thoughts lingered on what might have been. "My son shall reign where I could not," she might have whispered, a statement both resolute and tinged with bittersweet triumph. Her sacrifices, her battles, and her unyielding spirit were etched into the lineage that would bear the Plantagenet name. This resolution did not simply end a war, it forged the foundation of a new era. A lineage emerged that would weave itself into the fabric of England's history, its echoes felt in courts, battlefields, and the very soul of the kingdom. As the echoes of conflict faded, the stage was set for monarchs who would shape culture as well as crowns, blending power with patronage and forging legacies beyond mere rule. Medieval monarchs were not merely rulers of lands and people. They were also stewards of culture, weaving beauty into the tapestry of history with every stone laid and manuscript illuminated. Their patronage shaped the very soul of their kingdoms, elevating art and learning to new heights. Take, for instance, the soaring spires of Chartres Cathedral, piercing the heavens as if to touch the divine itself. This majestic sanctuary was more than a place of worship. It was a testament to faith and craftsmanship, where master masons and artisans poured their skill and devotion into every flying buttress and stained glass window. Each pane cast kaleidoscopic hues that danced across the sacred halls, telling stories of saints and kings, illuminating the spirit of an age. Not far from the sacred echoes of Chartres stood the grandeur of the Palace of Westminster, a hall echoing with royal splendor and the murmurs of council and ceremony. Its vast chambers bore witness to the workings of governance, but also to the flourish of courtly life, where tapestries hung heavy with symbolism and gold glinted from the chandeliers. It was a space where power met art, and where the monarchy's patronage breathed life into stone and silk. In the workshops behind these marvels, artisans worked with quiet pride. Our work glorifies the crown, one might say, the steady hammer of their craft resonating as a tribute to the monarchs who commissioned these wonders. Through their patronage, kings and queens shaped not only the political landscape, but the cultural heartbeat of their realms. This fusion of power and artistry left an indelible mark, a legacy of beauty and knowledge passed down through generations. It was a reminder that monarchy was not only about dominion, but about inspiring greatness that transcended time. Yet, amid these triumphs of art and architecture, royal courts knew that splendor also meant spectacle, a dazzling display of wealth and ceremony that entertained, impressed, and reinforced the monarch's grandeur. Imagine a grand hall alive with celebration, where torches cast wild shadows that flicker and dance upon the stone walls. The air buzzes with laughter and music, as nobles clad in vibrant silks and gleaming jewels whirl across the floor. This is no ordinary gathering. It is a spectacle of extravagance and daring, a night where the boundaries of decorum blur in a blaze of color and light. Among these lavish celebrations, one stands out in medieval memory, the Ball of the Burning Men. Here, courtiers donned costumes layered with flammable materials, designed to captivate and astonish. The room shimmered under the glow of flames, their reflection multiplying in the mirrors and gilded surfaces, weaving an illusion of firelight magic. Yet beneath the splendor lurked a silent peril. Suddenly, a careless spark turned spectacle to disaster. The festive blaze grew swiftly, and the revelers found themselves consumed by a cruel blaze, the joyous chorus replaced by cries of panic. The flames devour the revelry, a witness shouted, voice trembling between terror and disbelief. The hall, once a theater of delight, became a furnace of tragedy, burning away not just costumes, but lives and innocence. This harrowing event became more than a somber tale. It stood as a vivid warning etched into the annals of royal excess. It showed how the brightest festivities could ignite the darkest calamities. The lesson was clear. Excess courts calamity, and even the most dazzling splendor carries unseen chains. Royal courts, despite their glamour, were places of restraint and consequence, where every light could cast a shadow. The brilliance of celebration was always tethered to the weight of responsibility, reminding all who lived beneath the crown that power and peril walked hand in hand. Beneath the glittering veneer of crowns and courts lies a world where privacy is a rare treasure, and autonomy is tightly bound by expectation. Monarchs live ever watched by courtly eyes, every word measured, every gesture recorded. Their lives unfold not as they please, but as history and duty dictate, leaving them seldom truly alone, even in the quietest moments. Take Charles VI of France, for example, a king in a gilded cage. His chambers, though richly adorned, became a prison where courtiers and guards circled like hawks, vigilant against any sign of weakness. The walls that shielded him also confined him, as his every movement was monitored, and his fragile health scrutinized. Behind the grandeur, he lived a life marked by isolation and watchfulness, a vivid reminder that royal privilege came with heavy chains. This constant scrutiny was fueled by the immense pressure to uphold ideals far beyond human reach. Monarchs were expected to be beacons of virtue and might, paragons who could inspire loyalty and wield justice with unwavering strength. The crown demanded perfection, a relentless standard whispered behind closed doors by courtiers. The crown demands perfection. Every falter, every hint of doubt, risked undermining not just the ruler's reputation, but the stability of the realm itself. Yet within these constraints, monarchs bore their burdens with a quiet dignity, aware that their personal sacrifices shaped the fate of nations. Their lives, though circumscribed, were woven into the fabric of history, a testament to the complex balance between power and vulnerability. In the grand tapestry of medieval power, marriages were far more than unions of two souls. They were intricate moves in a game of thrones and vows. Every alliance forged in wedding halls echoed through kingdoms, weaving bonds of loyalty or kindling rivalries. Monarchs, especially queens, found themselves at the heart of these political gambits, their personal lives entwined with the fate of nations. Margaret of Anjou's story embodies this harsh reality, a queen forged in battle's fire. From the moment she crossed borders to wed Henry VI, she stepped into a world where love was secondary to survival and influence. Fierce and unyielding, Margaret wielded her will like a weapon, defending her son's right to the throne amid civil unrest and betrayal. Her life was a testament to the relentless demands placed on queens, who not only bore crowns, but bore the weight of dynasties. Central to a queen's role was the pressure to produce heirs, a womb bearing a dynasty's hope. Fertility was no mere personal matter. It was the linchpin upon which peace and power balanced. The birth of a son could secure alliances, quell disputes, and ensure continuity, while failure invited suspicion and peril. Within these confines, queens like Margaret fought not just for their children, but for the survival of their lineage. In moments of quiet determination, Margaret's resolve spoke volumes. For my son, I'll fight. This simple vow echoed the fierce love and unbreakable spirit driving many royal women through the labyrinth of duty and danger. Rising from the mists of history, the White Tower stands like a stone giant looming over London, a steadfast sentinel watching over the pulse of the realm. Its massive walls, carved from pale limestone, tell tales not only of defense, but of dominance, where kings once paced its chambers and decisions shaped the future of England. Within its shadow, power was both a fortress and a spectacle, a place where the weight of rule settled heavily upon royal shoulders. Across the Channel, the Palais de la Cité rises in grandeur, its very stones whispering of celestial splendor. The great hall within glimmers with sunlight filtered through stained glass, casting hues like jewels upon tapestries and marble floors. This was no mere residence, but a throne of light and legacy, where French monarchs held court amid artistry and ceremony that dazzled the senses. These castles were more than homes. They were fortresses of ambition, centers where political intrigue intertwined with cultural magnificence. Their walls witnessed the forging of alliances and the plotting of power, echoing with voices that commanded kingdoms and courted fate. A visitor standing in the shadow of these mighty halls might whisper in awe, "This castle breathes majesty," sensing the living heart of an empire pulsing through stone and mortar. In the tapestry of medieval Europe, Philippa of Hainaut arrived not merely as a bride, but as a union binding realms, a delicate thread weaving together the fortunes of England and the Low Countries. Her entrance was marked by grace and resolve, a queen whose presence promised both alliance and strength. As Edward III's devoted consort, Philippa was far more than a symbol of diplomacy. She became a queen nurturing a dynasty's roots, governing wisely in her husband's absence, and raising children who would carry the legacy forward. Her court blossomed under her care, a haven of culture and stability amid the often turbulent tides of monarchy. Her influence reached beyond motherhood. She was a steady hand guiding the realm's heart through seasons of challenge and change. Yet such devotion came at a steep price. When illness claimed her, it was as though a light dimmed by duty's toll flickered and faded within the castle walls. The queen who had so long held her family and kingdom close now faced her final rest. Edward's grief was profound. In a voice heavy with sorrow, he lamented, "My heart is broken with her loss." His words echoed the pain of a king mourning not only a beloved wife, but a pillar of his reign. Philippa's life, marked by love, sacrifice, and duty, reminds us of the human cost beneath royal splendor. Her story closes one chapter in our journey, even as the symbols of power she wielded, the crown jewels, shine onward, reflecting the strength and fragility of monarchy itself. In the heart of medieval monarchy, the crown jewels stood as more than mere ornaments. They were a radiant mandate from heaven, shimmering tokens of divine authority bestowed upon earthly rulers. Each gem, each intricate design, spoke to the sacred bond between king and cosmos, a glittering testament that the wearer was chosen by forces beyond mortal realm. Crafted by masterful hands, the artisans were like alchemists of gold and gems, transforming raw materials into objects of awe and reverence. Their work blended skill, artistry, and devotion, weaving stories of power and sanctity into every facet and setting. The crown jewels not only adorned monarchs, but proclaimed their celestial right to rule, dazzling courtiers and commoners alike with their splendor. Yet even such sacred treasures were not immune to mortal greed. In the year 1303, Westminster's hallowed vault suffered a brazen breach of sacred trust, an audacious theft that sent shockwaves through the kingdom. The crown jewels, symbols of inviolable authority, were seized in a bold act of rebellion against royal order. A chronicler's voice trembled with disbelief. "Thieves defy the king's justice." This dramatic event laid bare the vulnerabilities beneath the crown's gleam, a reminder that power, no matter how radiant, could be challenged and shaken. Still, as we marvel at these jewels, it becomes clear that no treasure, no matter how precious, could shield the fragile human heart beneath the gilded crown. As we draw the curtains on this voyage through medieval courts and castles, it's clear that beneath the dazzling crowns and towering fortresses lies a shared thread of mortal dreams, a humanity that links kings and queens to us all. These rulers, cloaked in regal splendor, carried hearts as vulnerable and hopes as fragile as anyone's, their lives a tapestry woven with ambition, love, loss, and resilience. Imagine now the great castles fading gently into the moonlight, their stone walls whispering secrets to the night sky. The banners flutter no more, yet their stories linger like soft echoes in the cool evening air, inviting you to step quietly into their world once more. It is a realm where grandeur meets frailty, and history's weight is borne by flesh and blood. If this journey through the labyrinth of time has stirred your spirit, I invite you to share these tales with fellow travelers of history's vast and winding paths. Spread the stories like lanterns lighting the darkness, so that more might find warmth and wonder in the flickering glow of days long past. And now, as the night deepens and the world grows still, I bid you good night. A lullaby from ancient halls that cradles you softly until dawn. May your dreams carry you across the centuries, bridging the distant and the near, the legendary and the lived. Rest well, fellow wanderer, until we meet again among the shadows and stories of history's embrace.